They said no one could have survived that crash. A truck blazing in the heart of a Montana blizzard, flames taller than the pines. But through that storm, a boy with one arm and a scarred German shepherd broke through the snow, dragging two men from the wreck, a veteran who'd once saved him, and a young officer whose guilt burned hotter than the fire itself. No one spoke that night. The wind howled, the flames died, and three broken souls stood where death had already passed. Some called it a miracle. Others whispered it was something owed, a debt of mercy long delayed. But those who were there, they say it wasn't luck or faith that pulled them out. It was loyalty, pure, wordless, and stronger than the storm. If you believe courage and loyalty still matter in this world, join us by subscribing to Healing with Max. And wherever you are tonight, may you find the strength to keep walking through the fire until warmth finds you again. The storm rolled over the valley like an unending tide, swallowing everything in a merciless white. Wind cut across the desolate Montana plain, screaming through telephone wires and empty fence posts, erasing all signs of color and sound until the world became one long breath of frost. The snow came sideways, needles instead of flakes, burying roads, homes, even the last glow of porch lights that once flickered from cabins along the ridge. And through that endless howl, one figure moved, a boy small enough to disappear, if not for the faint glint of metal from his arm. Samuel was 8, his frame fragile but his steps deliberate. Each one pressed deep into the drifts, as though willpower itself kept him from being swept away. His wooden prosthetic arm, built from scrap and worn smooth by time, clung to the sleeve of a coat too thin for such cold. His cheeks burned red, his lips cracked, yet his eyes, gray-blue like the storm itself, stayed fixed ahead. He was not running from something, but toward it. Every gust pushed him back, every flake stung his eyes, but still he went on. Beside him, Max forged through the snow with a steadiness no human could match. The 6-year-old German shepherd moved low and silent, his sable fur dusted white, his breath fogging the air. A scar crossed the ridge of his muzzle, old, healed, but his eyes, deep amber and endlessly alert, burned with intelligence. He was not just following orders, he was leading. At every pause he turned back to the boy, his expression speaking a language older than words. Keep going, he's still out there. The valley below was nothing but smoke and frost, yet something pulsed faintly beyond the blizzard's blur, a dull orange flicker swallowed and reborn by the snow. At first Samuel thought it was the reflection of lightning, until the smell reached him. Gasoline, sharp and chemical, slicing through the wind like an accusation. He stumbled, heart pounding, then gripped his crutch tighter. The air itself trembled with heat. Max's ears flattened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. They crested the hill, and there it was. A pickup truck, half buried in white, flames curling up from the hood like desperate hands clawing for air. The metal snapped and groaned, black smoke twisting against the gray sky. Through the snowstorm's haze, Samuel saw movement. No, shapes. In the truck bed, beneath the lash of fire and falling ash, lay two men, bound hand and foot. Their faces were ghosted with soot, their mouths sealed with silver tape that shimmered in the light. The boy froze. One of them, his shoulders broad, his hair streaked with gray beneath the soot, was Raymond Cole, the veteran who had once found him years ago, half-starved behind a collapsed barn, and carried him to safety. The man who had taught him to carve wood with one hand and call every scar a map. The only person in the world Samuel still called family. "Max," he breathed, though his voice vanished into the wind. The dog was already moving. Max bounded forward, claws slicing through the frost as he leapt onto the tailgate, teeth flashing in the firelight. The smell of burning leather and oil choked the air. Samuel limped closer, his crutch sinking deep in the snow with every lunge. The flames hissed as the storm tried to smother them, but each gust only fanned them higher. Sparks rained down, glinting off the boy's wooden arm like falling stars. He reached the truck, grabbed the freezing metal, and beat against it with all his strength. "Raymond!" His voice cracked, lost between thunder and fire. Still, he struck again. Inside, Raymond didn't stir. The second man, young, uniformed, a badge half melted on his chest, lay motionless. The ropes that bound them smoked where the fire touched, but refused to break. Max growled louder, his jaws snapping at the coarse hemp, tugging, tearing, his paws slipping against the wet steel. The snow hissed against the flames, turning to steam. Samuel's lungs burned. The air was poison. He coughed, but didn't stop. His left hand, the one that wasn't wood, beat the side of the truck again and again until the metal dented under his palm. Then, a sound. A groan, faint but real. Raymond's head lifted. Through a veil of smoke, his eyes opened, gray, glassy, searching. He saw the blur of the boy's face framed by the firelight, and in that instant, something shifted. Not recognition, but instinct. He pulled once, twice, the ropes straining until Max's teeth found purchase. The German shepherd jerked hard, growling deep from his chest, and the fibers began to fray. Smoke coiled between them, alive and cruel. Samuel screamed his name again, and Raymond's shoulders heaved. The rope gave way. His arms flew free, and he tore the tape from his mouth with a gasp that sounded more like pain than relief. The smell of char and gasoline thickened. Somewhere beneath the truck, liquid hissed and bubbled. Time collapsed to seconds. "Come on." Samuel's words were lost, but his meaning wasn't. Raymond's eyes locked on him, and he moved. He ripped the bindings from his legs, dragging the unconscious officer with him. The veteran's body was heavy with exhaustion, his movements stiff and uneven, yet the determination in his face was the same that once carried him through battlefields. Max leapt down first, circling, barking sharply as the snow beneath them melted into black slush. Raymond stumbled, half lifting, half pulling the officer toward the edge of the ditch. The wind screamed, the sky flashed, and the fire roared like it wanted to take the world down with it. They cleared the tailgate just as the explosion came. It was not one sound, but 1,000, a thunderclap of flame and metal that split the night. Heat punched through the air, flinging snow into steam. Samuel fell backward, the impact rattling through his chest, his vision a swirl of orange and white. He felt arms wrap around him, pulling him close. Raymond's body shielded his like a wall of flesh and bone, heavy and unmoving. The snowstorm swallowed the blast in a hiss that went on forever. When the silence came, it was eerie. Only the wind remained, gentler now, whispering instead of howling. The truck was gone, replaced by a crater of black smoke and glowing embers. Snow drifted down slowly, trying to cover the wreckage as if the earth itself wanted to forget. Samuel blinked, disoriented, and found Raymond still crouched over him, face streaked with soot, his breath shallow but steady. The veteran's hand rested on his shoulder, trembling not from cold, but from something far older, fear mixed with relief. Max limped toward them, fur singed along his flank, eyes wild but alive. He nudged Raymond's arm, then turned his gaze to the snow, nose twitching. Something caught the boy's eye, a faint glint just beyond the ashes, half buried in frost. He reached out with his wooden hand, scraping the ice away until the shape revealed itself. A police badge, its edge burned black, its insignia still visible beneath the soot. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint crackle of dying fire and the echo of distant thunder. Samuel turned the badge over in his palm. The name engraved beneath the scorched metal was unreadable, yet the weight of it pressed heavy in his chest. Somewhere behind him, Raymond rose slowly, his shadow tall against the snow, and Max stood beside them both, tail low but steady. The storm was far from over, but for the first time that night, it wasn't the cold that made Samuel shiver. The snow deepened as they left the smoking wreck behind. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches bowed under the weight of ice, their shadows long and indistinct beneath the pale light of a fading day. The forest had that kind of stillness that makes every sound seem too loud. The crunch of boots, the shallow rasp of breath, the faint metallic clink from Raymond's belt. He moved slow, shoulders stiff from pain. The color drained from his lips. Behind him, Ethan Ward, the young officer they had dragged from the blaze, stumbled forward, face pale beneath the ash streaking his skin. He couldn't have been more than 25. The navy of his torn uniform looked almost black against the snow, his badge half melted, his hands shaking as though the cold had found its way inside his bones. Ahead of them walked Samuel, a small figure leading men twice his size through the storm as if born to silence. The boy said nothing, only followed the low growl of Max, whose ears stayed sharp even as frost clung to his whiskers. The dog moved with purpose, a soldier's gait, deliberate, never rushed. He would stop, sniff the air, glance back once at the boy, then continue, pause sinking soundlessly into the drift. They followed him because there was nothing else to follow. No trail, no sun, only that animal certainty that somewhere ahead, safety still existed. The forest thickened. Needles brushed their faces like cold hands, and branches snapped under the weight of their passing. A rabbit darted once through the snow and vanished, the only living thing besides them. Every few steps, Raymond coughed, the sound raw, his breath visible in harsh white bursts. His left arm hung close to his chest. The heat from the explosion had burned through the fabric. Ethan offered to help, but the older man waved him off with a glance, half gratitude, half pride. He didn't speak, yet the silence between them said enough. They were alive, but not safe. Max stopped abruptly near a break in the trees. His tail lowered, and a warning rumble rolled from deep in his chest. Samuel froze, one hand resting on the dog's flank. Through the curtain of falling snow, the boy caught a shape, a structure leaning slightly to one side, roof sagging under ice. A ranger's cabin long abandoned, its windows boarded, one shutter hanging loose like a broken eyelid. Smoke stains blackened the wood near the chimney, though the fire inside had died long ago. They reached the porch. The steps groaned beneath Raymond's boots. A cold wind slipped through the cracks, carrying the faint smell of old ash and something else. Metallic, sharp, like dried blood. The veteran's hand brushed the doorknob but stopped. Scratches lined the wood, deep, uneven, too high for an animal. Someone had clawed or knifed at it recently. Ethan exchanged a glance with him, then pulled his sidearm, the barrel trembling slightly in his grip. He nodded once. Raymond pushed the door, open. The darkness inside was thick. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by their entry. The floor creaked underfoot, and the light from the doorway spilled just enough to reveal the outline of an old cot, a rusted stove, and something scattered across the floor. Wire loops, cans, and footprints. Not one set, but many. Heavy, deliberate. Samuel crouched low, his eyes scanning like a child used to reading danger in the dirt. "It's a camp," Ethan murmured, voice low. "But not for long term." His hand brushed a ration tin, still sticky with grease. Whoever had been here left in a hurry, or meant to come back. Raymond's gaze caught on the wall near the stove. Marks again, this time thin and vertical. Knife sharpening. His jaw tightened. "Military," he said quietly, almost to himself. Ethan turned. "You sure?" The older man didn't answer. Instead, he knelt, the old pain in his knees catching him halfway down. His gloved fingers picked up a small scrap of paper under the cot. A list. Coordinates. Partially burned. The ink bled, but still legible enough to make the numbers sting his memory. He had seen them before, stamped into metal tags, spoken into radios back when the world made more sense. Max padded toward the far corner, nose to the ground. He whined once, then began pawing at the frozen dirt near the threshold. Snow from the open doorway spilled in, melting against the warmth of their breath. Samuel knelt beside him, brushing away the frost. His wooden arm clacked softly against the floorboards. Underneath, something caught the dim light. A scrap of cloth, olive drab, the kind that doesn't belong to civilians. Ethan leaned closer. "What is it?" he whispered. Raymond didn't answer right away. He took the cloth gently, shook off the snow, and stared at the small metallic glint sewn into the edge. It was a military tag, worn smooth from years of sweat and dust. The name etched into it froze his blood. Kenton Graves. For a long moment, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. The veteran's lips parted, not in surprise, but in recognition. The kind that hurts because it confirms what the soul already knows. "He was my CO," he muttered. "Back in Kandahar. They said he disappeared after the inquiry." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Inquiry. The polite term for disgrace. Ethan stepped back, tension running through his frame. "You're saying this is connected? That someone wanted me dead?" Raymond cut in, eyes still fixed on the tag. The wind howled through the gaps in the wall as if agreeing. The truth was heavier than the air itself. Kenton Graves, a man who once commanded with the authority of a god, now turned ghost in the snow, his presence etched into the wood of a forgotten cabin. Revenge didn't need to shout. Sometimes it just waited for the right season. Samuel looked from one man to the other, his breath fogging the air. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the silence that followed. Max pressed against his side, tail still low. Outside, the storm built again, gusts rattling the shutters like bones. Raymond stood slowly, slipping the tag into his pocket. "We stay till dawn," he said. "Then we move." His tone left no room for argument. Ethan only nodded, though his eyes lingered on the scratches by the door, the shape of fear wearing a uniform. They set a small fire in the stove, just enough to push back the cold. The orange glow crawled over the walls, turning the cabin into a fragile island of light. For a moment, it felt like peace. Samuel sat near Max, head resting on the dog's shoulder, while Raymond cleaned the wound along his arm with melted snow. Ethan stood guard by the window, eyes scanning the dark. But peace in a place like this never lasts. It began as a faint pulse on the glass, A single, almost invisible spark of red. Ethan frowned, leaned closer, the reflection catching his face. A dot, steady, mechanical, watching. He blinked once, twice, but it stayed. "Raymond," he whispered, voice cutting through the quiet. The veteran turned, following his gaze. The red light blinked again, tiny, deliberate, no bigger than a firefly, but colder than anything born of nature. It hovered there for just a heartbeat before vanishing into the white. The wind rose outside, whistling through the pines like something alive, and all three men, man, boy, and dog, turned toward the window where the light had been, their shadows long against the cabin floor. Somewhere beyond the storm, a machine's lens blinked back. They sealed the door with what little strength remained. A wooden chair wedged under the handle, a table pushed against it, snow packed into the cracks like a crude mortar. The cabin sighed against the weight of the storm, boards creaking as if the forest itself leaned closer to listen. The red dot had vanished, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a bruise beneath the skin. Inside, the silence thickened, broken only by the soft crackle of fire and the ragged rhythm of a man trying to stay alive. Raymond sat slumped against the wall, his breathing uneven, the color in his face drained to ash. Blood had soaked through the torn sleeve of his coat, spreading dark and heavy along the fabric. His right hand trembled when he tried to move, and the sound that left his throat wasn't quite pain. It was frustration, the deep kind born from knowing your body is no longer yours. Samuel knelt beside him, small and steady, the steam of melted snow rising from a tin cup in his only hand. The boy's movements were careful, reverent almost, as he poured the warm water over the wound and pressed the cleanest scrap of cloth he could find against it. His wooden arm rested across his lap, catching glints from the firelight like a shard of amber. Max lay near them, pressed close to share his warmth, his fur damp from melted snow, his chest rising in slow, vigilant rhythm. Every so often, his ears twitched toward the window, then back again. He didn't rest. He only waited. Ethan sat by the hearth, feeding small pieces of bark into the flame. The light flickered across his young face, tracing the exhaustion etched there. His hands shook, but not from the cold. Something heavier lived behind his eyes, a shadow that had followed him long before this storm. For a while, no one spoke. The fire popped softly, casting ghostly shapes across the walls. Then Ethan's voice broke the silence. Low, hesitant, a confession escaping the weight of his chest. "I used to work for him," he said, eyes fixed on the flame. "For Graves." Raymond's head lifted slightly, his gaze sharp despite the fatigue. Ethan went on, words tumbling like stones. He had been hired as private security 2 years back, guarding shipments, escorting convoys through remote regions. He hadn't asked questions at first. Good men rarely did when desperation called. But the boxes they moved weren't what the manifests claimed. People instead of goods. Bodies instead of supplies. The young officer's jaw clenched. By the time I knew it was too late, I tried to report it. Graves found out. He swallowed hard, the memory choking him. They sent others after me. That's why I was there, tied up in that truck. I was the message. The firelight caught the sheen of moisture in his eyes before he turned away. Shame has a way of surviving even in the coldest rooms. Raymond watched him quietly, the lines in his face softening. He understood that kind of guilt, the kind you can't outrun because it wears your own voice. Samuel wrung the cloth again, dipped it into the tin, and replaced it over Raymond's arm. His movements carried no judgment, only care. He remembers everything. He whispered suddenly, looking toward Max. The dog, as if hearing his name, lifted his head and nuzzled closer to Raymond's side. For the first time in hours, the veteran managed a faint smile. "So do you," he murmured. The words came rough but kind, settling like a promise between them. Outside, the wind shifted. Max's ears flicked again. He stood, muscles tense, nose to the crack under the door. A low sound built in his chest. Not a growl yet. Something quieter, warning without panic. Samuel froze, eyes flicking toward the window. "It's just the wind," Ethan whispered, though even he didn't believe it. He reached for his pistol anyway. The dog moved to the back corner of the cabin and sniffed along the boards. Then, without sound, he nosed open a gap near the frame and slipped through it, vanishing into the white. The cold rushed in behind him, a breath of wild air. Samuel's heart hammered, but he didn't stop him. Max knew what he was doing. Minutes passed. Long, hollow minutes marked only by the crackling fire and Raymond's uneven breaths. Then, faintly, a scratching sound at the door. Samuel scrambled to unbar it before Ethan could stop him. Max pushed through, head low, dragging something heavy wrapped in charred canvas. The smell of smoke and chemicals filled the room again. Ethan knelt to help unwrap it. Inside lay a small medical kit, half melted but intact enough to matter. The red cross on its side was scorched but visible, the kind used in military field units. Bandages, disinfectant, morphine, enough to pull a man from the edge. Raymond blinked, disbelief flickering across his face. "From the truck," he rasped. Ethan nodded. He went back. Max sank to the floor beside Samuel, tail thumping weakly against the boards, his muzzle streaked with ash. The boy smiled through the fatigue, whispering, "He remembers everything." His voice carried a tremor of pride, quiet but radiant. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was faith returning, fragile but real. They worked in silence after that. Ethan cleaned and wrapped the wound properly this time, his hands steadier, guided by purpose instead of guilt. The fire burned brighter, its glow reaching farther across the small room. The walls no longer seemed so narrow. For the first time since the explosion, warmth felt possible. Raymond leaned his head back, eyes half closed, listening to the soft rhythm of breathing and the wind against the roof. Somewhere beneath the exhaustion, hope stirred, small, like an ember, but alive. Then Samuel stiffened. The boy's gaze caught something in the flicker of the flames. He moved closer to the window, squinting through the frost. At first it was only movement, shadows that didn't belong to trees. But as the firelight shifted, the shapes became clearer. Depressions in the snow, evenly spaced, circling the cabin like a silent wheel. Footprints, dozens of them. Ethan saw it too. He grabbed the lantern, bringing it closer to the glass. The reflection of his own face stared back, pale and uncertain, framed by prints that led into the darkness beyond. Raymond stirred, forcing himself upright despite the pain. "How long?" he whispered. Ethan shook his head. "They've been here a while." The wind wailed again, and for a moment it almost sounded like laughter. Max stood, every hair along his spine rising, a growl rolling from deep within. It wasn't the cautious warning from before. It was the sound of a guardian who knew the circle had closed. Samuel backed away from the window, his small chest rising and falling fast, eyes wide. Outside, the storm moved differently now, the rhythm of footsteps hidden beneath its roar. They were not alone. They had never been. The fire sputtered once, then steadied. Max lowered his stance, eyes fixed on the door. Raymond reached for his rifle with trembling fingers, the barrel catching the orange light. And in that suspended silence between breath and fear, even the snow seemed to pause, listening. The circle in the snow was complete. The shot came without warning. A crack of thunder against glass. The window shattered, sending shards and snow into the room like a burst of frozen stars. The fire hissed as embers died under the sudden gale. Raymond didn't think. He moved. One arm shot out, pulling Samuel by the collar and shoving him beneath the cot, his body forming a wall between the boy and the chaos. Another shot split the silence, punching through the far wall, wood splintering. Ethan dropped to one knee beside the stove, pistol raised, eyes darting to find the muzzle flashes beyond the storm. Outside, shadows moved, men in dark coats and goggles, faces wrapped in scarves, their breath visible in the dim glow of their rifles. The snow swallowed the sound of everything but the violence. Raymond's chest heaved. The burn in his arm throbbed with every heartbeat, but instinct had taken over. He reached for his rifle, still propped near the wall, and chambered around. "Stay down," he rasped, voice hoarse. Samuel obeyed, though his eyes shone through the shadows beneath the cot, wide, alert, unblinking. Max's growl filled the room, low and steady, until it turned into motion. The German shepherd leapt through the door with a sound between a roar and a snarl, a streak of sable and fury vanishing into white. The snow exploded around him, a blur of fur and blood and bone. The first mercenary didn't even scream before he went down. The second fired wild, muzzle flashing in panic. Raymond's shot answered, sharp and final. Ethan joined him, moving between the window and the door, each pull of the trigger more desperate than disciplined. The forest lit in fragments, orange, white, black. Gunfire muffled by the storm, the cries of men lost under wind. The smell of cordite and pine bled into the air, the taste of iron thick on their tongues. Raymond's body moved on memory, every motion carved from years of survival, but each recoil cost him breath. Blood darkened his sleeve again, spreading faster now, but he didn't stop. Samuel crawled forward, his wooden arm scraping the floor. He could see flashes through the cracks, Max lunging, rolling, snow stained with motion. He wanted to run to him, to help somehow, but Raymond's hand caught his shoulder, the grip firm despite the shaking. "When I say run," the old soldier breathed, "you run." The boy shook his head, jaw trembling, but his voice came steady. "Not without Max." Outside, the world erupted again. A thud, a clatter of metal on wood, then silence, a silence too brief to be mercy. Raymond's instincts screamed before his mind caught up. A grenade rolled through the door, small, black, hissing. Ethan saw it first. Without thinking, he lunged, snatched it with gloved hands, and hurled it back into the storm. Light tore through the night. The explosion flared like false dawn, swallowing the edge of the forest in orange. The shockwave hit the cabin, rattling its frame, showering dust from the rafters. When the sound faded, snow fell in slow motion, 1,000 pieces of broken light descending over the dead. Ethan lowered his weapon, chest heaving. 3 bodies lay in the snow, twisted among shattered branches. The others, those who'd come with them, were gone, swallowed by the blizzard that had hidden them in the first place. For a heartbeat, there was only silence again. Then a sound, ragged, human, broke it. Raymond coughed, hand to his mouth, and when he pulled it away, it glistened red. He sank to one knee, shoulders trembling, breath shallow. Samuel was there in an instant, pushing against his arm, voice thin but urgent. You're okay. You're okay. Raymond looked at him through the haze, the boy's face streaked with soot and fear, and saw something he hadn't felt in years: the need to live, not for himself, but for someone else. Max limped through the broken doorway, fur matted, one ear torn, but his tail still moved. He went straight to Raymond, pressing his head under the man's arm, the same way he'd done in every moment of loss. Ethan watched, something breaking in his face, a kind of reverence. He holstered his pistol slowly, the storm's howl the only applause left to the living. Raymond let his forehead rest against Max's. The dog's breath came heavy, but his eyes were alive. "You did good, soldier," Raymond whispered. And for a second, it didn't feel like war anymore. It felt like forgiveness. The fire inside the cabin crackled weakly, orange licking against the charred wood. Samuel moved toward one of the fallen mercenaries, curiosity and fear pulling him in equal measure. The man's mask was gone, face young and empty, as if death had taken even his purpose. Something near his hand sparked faintly, a radio earpiece half buried in the snow. Samuel crouched, brushed it off, and the static came alive with a whisper. A man's voice, cold and clear, slid through the crackle. "Kenton wants the boy alive." The boy froze. Max's growl rumbled low again, and Raymond turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Outside, the wind shifted once more, carrying the promise that this storm had only just begun. The first light of dawn broke not in warmth, but in ash-gray silence. Snow glimmered faintly across the valley, painting the world in tones of steel and sorrow. Raymond moved through the drifts with slow, deliberate steps, each one carving a mark of defiance into the frost. Ethan followed close, his uniform torn, his jaw set in grim resolve. Samuel walked between them, small and pale against the vast white expanse, his wooden arm clutched against his chest, and Max, wounded but alive, limped beside him, each breath a shallow echo of loyalty refusing to die. They had tracked the mercenaries' trail through the forest, the footprints leading down toward a wide hollow carved by ice and stone. The place was a quarry, long abandoned, where echoes of labor had frozen into silence. Frost coated the cranes and rusted girders, icicles hanging from their frames like teeth. Below, in the hollow center, stood men. 5 of them, rifles slung across their backs, their posture easy, confident. And between them, framed by the skeletal remains of machines, stood Kenton Graves. He was taller than Raymond remembered, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark overcoat lined with fur, his hair silver and untouched by snow, as if the storm refused to lay claim to him. His gloved hands rested loosely at his sides, his boots polished even in ruin. When he smiled, it wasn't cruelty that crossed his face, but something worse: pity. His eyes, gray and sharp as a wolf's, fixed on Raymond with the calm of a man who believed his sins were justified. "You trained me to fight monsters, Ray," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the frozen air. "You just never realized I'd become one." The words hung between them, suspended like breath in the cold. Raymond didn't answer. He stood rooted in the snow, the wind pulling at his coat, the ache in his ribs forgotten. Kenton's laughter followed, soft, measured, the kind that mocked more than anger ever could. He stepped forward, gesturing to the valley around them. "Look at this world. You think it still runs on mercy? You think decency feeds anyone? I sold what was left of honor so that order could survive. Every life taken, every child sold. It kept the machine moving." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle, fury flickering beneath the surface. "You call that order?" he hissed under his breath, but Raymond lifted a trembling hand to stop him. His eyes never left Graves. "You talk about survival," the veteran said quietly, voice breaking through the cold. "But all I see is fear dressed as power." Graves tilted his head, the faintest smile returning. "Fear built every empire we ever served." He raised his pistol then, slow, deliberate, the barrel leveled not at Raymond, but at Samuel, for a heartbeat time-fractured. The snow paused mid-air, and all sound fell away. The gunshot broke it. The flash was blinding, the sound sharp enough to crack bone. But the bullet never reached the boy. Max lunged from Raymond's side, a streak of muscle and instinct, and the impact hit him mid-leap. His body twisted, fur flaring with blood and snow as he collapsed hard into the drift. A sound tore through the air, not the cry of an animal, but the anguish of something sacred breaking. Samuel dropped to his knees beside him, hands fumbling uselessly at the dog's side. "No," he whispered, voice shaking. "No, no, no." Max's chest rose once, then again, shallower, weaker. His paw twitched, pressing faintly against the boy's sleeve as if to reassure him. Rage ignited like dry tinder. Ethan roared and charged. The distance between him and Graves vanished in a blur of snow and fury. They collided, rolling hard, the pistol flying from Graves's grip and vanishing into the drift. Ethan pinned him, fists slamming against the older man's face, blood marking the snow with each blow. "You don't get to speak about survival," he shouted, his voice raw. "You built hell and called it order." Graves struggled beneath him, still smiling through split lips, teeth stained red. "And you came crawling back to it." The taunt died as Raymond stepped forward, rifle raised, the trembling in his hands steadying at last. His voice cut through the chaos like a prayer stripped of faith. "Enough!" Ethan froze. Graves turned his head slightly, panting. "You can't kill me, Ray. You know what we became. You know what made us." Raymond's breath shuddered. The old ache in his heart, the one he'd carried from every battlefield, every funeral, pressed against his ribs like a blade. He looked at Graves, not as an enemy, but as what remained of a brotherhood that should never have existed. "You were never the monster, Kenton," he said softly. "The war was." The sirens reached them before the echoes faded, distant at first, then growing louder, winding through the valley like the song of judgment. Red and blue lights shimmered against the snow, fracturing across the ice as rescue teams descended the ridge. Ethan dropped his hold, rolling aside, exhaustion overtaking rage. Two officers seized Graves, forcing his arms behind his back, cuffs clicking over bloodied gloves. The silver-haired man did not resist. He only stared upward, eyes fixed on the colorless sky as if searching for something worth remembering. Raymond turned away, every breath cutting deeper. The snow beneath his boots was stained dark where Max lay. Samuel crouched beside him, refusing to move. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but his eyes burned with the same fire that once lived in Raymond's own. "He saved me," Samuel whispered, his small voice trembling. "He always saves me." Raymond knelt beside them, his gloved hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. "He saved us all." The words came out broken, almost inaudible, but true. The sirens faded into the background hum of engines and voices. The cold tightened its grip. Around them, the quarry stood silent again, its ghosts at rest. Raymond's eyes fell to Max, his chest barely rising, fur matted with crimson. And for the first time since the war, the old soldier prayed. The sun came late to the Montana hills. spilling over the snow like honey over glass. The storm had passed days ago, but its memory lingered in the softened drifts and the way every sound seemed to echo just a second longer than it should. Raymond stood on the wooden porch of a small mountain clinic, his breath steady now, though his arm was bound tightly in bandages beneath his coat. Beside him, Samuel pressed close, his small hand gripping the old man's sleeve. Through the frosted window, they watched as a nurse, a kind woman with gray-streaked hair tied in a bun, gently changed Max's dressing. The German shepherd lay upon a folded blanket, ribs rising slow and thin beneath the gauze. His fur had been shaved where the bullet had entered. Pink skin glistened faintly beneath the morning light. Yet his tail, faint but determined, thumped against the floor each time Samuel's reflection moved in the window. Raymond's chest tightened. That sound, the dull rhythm of persistence, was the purest heartbeat he had ever known. The nurse smiled through the glass and gave a small nod, her lips forming words they couldn't hear but both understood. He's going to make it. Raymond exhaled, the kind of breath that felt like releasing years instead of seconds. He rested his hand atop Samuel's head. The boy's hair, dark and soft, caught the light like ash beneath gold. "He's tougher than both of us," Raymond murmured, and Samuel smiled weakly, eyes wet. By midday, the town had stirred. People gathered at the diner and post office, voices low, sharing the news that had already spread beyond the valley. Kenton Graves, once untouchable, now captured. His trafficking network dismantled. His men in custody. The headlines in the morning paper bore Raymond's name only in passing, but everyone in town knew who had ended the nightmare that had crept through their forests. And everyone whispered, too, about the dog, the one who had taken a bullet for a child. Ethan arrived later that day, his arm in a sling, his face still marked by bruises. The young officer moved slower now, with the humility of someone who had looked directly at the cost of survival and chosen something better. He stood beside Raymond at the clinic steps, looking out toward the fields where the wind bent the dry grass in waves. "Court hearing's done," he said softly. "I told them everything. No more secrets." His voice was rough, but not broken. "Feels strange, doesn't it, when the fighting stops?" Raymond nodded, his gaze fixed on the mountains. "It never really stops," he said. "But sometimes it changes shape." Ethan looked down at his boots, then at the boy playing quietly with a wooden stick near Max's cot inside. "You think they'll be all right?" "They already are," Raymond said. And for the first time, he believed it. That evening, the town gathered again, not in fear, but in remembrance. Someone had lit candles outside the sheriff's office. Someone else had hung a folded flag near the entrance. A wooden table stood in the center of the square, draped with white cloth and wildflowers. Upon it lay a small bronze medal engraved with a single paw print. Raymond stepped forward through the hush of the crowd, the medal gleaming faintly in his weathered hands. Max was there too, bandaged but standing. His right side trembled with every step, yet he refused to sit. Samuel held his collar gently, eyes bright beneath the dusk. The boy's red scarf fluttered in the wind, catching on the light of the candles. Raymond knelt before them, the movement slow, deliberate, and reverent. He slipped the medal around Max's neck. The medal rested against the dog's fur like a promise fulfilled. The boy wiped his eyes with his sleeve, smiling through tears. "He's a hero," Samuel whispered. Raymond's voice came steady, though the emotion beneath it ran deep as the earth. "Heroes don't always stand tall," he said, Sometimes they crawl through snow on broken legs, or bark when the world goes silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed to pause, letting the words drift unbroken through the valley. Then a single bark, soft, low, proud, rose from Max's throat. The sound echoed across the hills like a prayer answered, scattering into the twilight. The crowd smiled, some wept. Later, when the candles burned low and the people began to leave, Raymond remained on the steps. The stars came out one by one, faint and forgiving. Beside him, Samuel slept curled against Max, the boy's wooden arm resting gently on the dog's flank. Ethan stood nearby, watching over them in silence. Raymond looked toward the horizon where the mountains met the sky, and something within him, something scarred and silent for too long, finally eased. For the first time in years, he felt warmth not from the fire, but from faith restored. Some stories don't end when the last shot fades or when the storm clears. They linger in the spaces between words, in the breaths we take when we finally let ourselves feel again. Maybe that's what courage really is. Not the noise of battle, but the quiet that follows it. The kind that asks nothing in return. The kind that keeps showing up even when no one is watching. There are people and souls not born to lead or conquer, but to hold the line for others. A child who won't give up, a soldier who finally learns to forgive, a dog who guards without fear. They remind us that loyalty isn't a promise. It's a heartbeat that stays, even when the world falls apart. If you listen closely, you might still hear them. In the wind that passes through the hills, in the soft rhythm of footsteps heading home. They don't ask for monuments or medals, just a moment of silence, a whisper of gratitude for those who keep the light burning in a world that too often forgets to look for it. Because sometimes, the quietest hearts carry the loudest courage.